Okay, let me be clear, because I've said this a number of times, but let me say it again, and I know I'll be saying a lot more of this in the coming days. The Swiss, I think I made a video at some point saying, when you go into negotiations, you cannot afford to go into negotiations from a position of weakness. You want to go into negotiations from a position of strength. I said that. But at the same time, at no point does anybody go into negotiations when they're 100% ready. The only reason you negotiate is because you realize that you cannot achieve everything you want, and that the other party realizes also that they cannot achieve everything they want. As a result, you find ways of meeting each other at some point. Is it going to be midway, 3/4 of the way right, or 3/4 of the way left? Depends on the stakes that you hold. That's how negotiations work. So, number one, that has been my strong argument. Number two is the fact that I do not believe that the Yaoundé regime is willing or ready to negotiate. As a result, Scope's position and its decision to be part of this process has been for completely different reasons. And I find it a bit sad that most of our people do not see this, and we are letting go of opportunities which have been gifted to us. One, since 1972, let's say 1984, prior to that we had the likes of Professor Fonlon already advocating. But since 1984, when Fon Gorji Dinka decided to declare our separation officially from the Yaoundé regime, or the other way around, when Mr. Biya decided to secede from whatever they had perceived to be a united Republic of Cameroon, our people have been clamoring for the international community to step in and find ways of giving us that recognition which we've never had, right? Now, 30 years down the line, after losing, 10,000 people, 1 million people in exile, or at least displaced, schools burnt, villages burnt, and so on, we finally find an international stakeholder that steps up and says, listen, I realize that you've got a problem, and this problem has got two sides. There is one side which is represented by the Yaoundé regime, and there is the other that represents the southern Cameroonian people. And we want to step in and help you find a solution to that problem. Now, what has just happened is that after 30 years of struggling to get somebody to say, hey, two people are fighting, let's step in, we finally achieved that. Something nobody, the British are not even willing to recognize that such a thing is existing. The French are fighting against it. The Americans have pretended. Everybody around the world pretends that there is a fight between two separate parties. And the narrative that has been out there for the past 30 years has been, oh, don't worry, it's an internal problem, we're going to fix it, just leave it to us. Finally, we've achieved that. We finally got a player that says, there is something wrong here. We've got two separate units that are in conflict, and we need to find ways of resolving it. That's victory number one. It's a major victory that we just achieved. And for us to cement that victory, we need to push and get this to be documented and be part and parcel of the narrative that we're going to talk about a year or two from today. So that's reason number one, that we stepped in there and we think it's vital that we are in there. Reason number two is that when you step in there, you're pushing the Yaoundé regime to be on the defensive. And what is that defensive? We have always known this regime is not willing to negotiate. It doesn't want to talk. It doesn't want to find solutions. It continues to pretend that there is no problem. It's an internal problem. Now it's been pushed to the point where it says it's got one of two choices. It either says, you know what, we never agreed that there was going to be any kind of discussion, any kind of talks. We have never promised anything to the Swiss, so we don't care. That's good, because by so doing, they are saying we are not interested in solutions. And it now pits the Yaoundé regime against the international community. That's one. Or the Yaoundé regime says, yes, actually, we asked you to mediate for us. We need to find solutions. Then what that does is that it forces the Yaoundé regime to show good faith. For us to find any solution to this, we need to go back to our history. We need to go back and have questions around where did we come from? What were the agreements? You say there is a union between these two territories. Can you show us a treaty of union between the two? International law starts to apply. And it puts Yaoundé on the back foot. That's the second thing. So we know that it will expose Yaoundé if it comes to the table. And it will expose Yaoundé even further if it refuses to come to the table. It is no coincidence, therefore, that you find a Yaoundé regime decides to go and organize a national dialogue while there is a Swiss process going on. What is it trying to do? If it believed in the Swiss process, it wouldn't have done that. But it is carrying out this comedy with the hope that the Swiss process will fizzle out. Now we have a major opportunity here. What I find interesting is that a lot of our brothers and sisters are also running, while the Yaoundé regime is running away from it, we are also advocating and say, let's run away from it. Oh, we don't trust the Swiss. Of course, nobody trusts the Swiss, but the Swiss do not trust us. We are not in this because they love us. We are in this because they find opportunities. But remember that we are not talking about the Swiss government alone. Who is putting the money for these meetings to take place? It's not Switzerland, it's Canada. Then you have the backing of other countries. So at the end of the process, and back to your question, Scope has been part of the talks, but Scope is part of the talks because we see opportunities beyond Facebook backstabbing and blaming and cursing and everything. We don't play that game. We understand that where we are right now, we are on the international stage with major actors. And the point we are trying to make, what do we want to achieve at the end of this, is to ensure that these major actors get to see the reality. At the end of this process, what do I think will be achieved? Number one, do I believe that the Swiss-led process is going to produce results with negotiations at this stage? No, I don't think so. But the question is, what do we want to achieve out of it? That, for me, is what matters. At the end of the day, we would have gained international sympathy. We would have gained the sympathy of the international world for those who get to understand our issues a bit more, to say, now we understand what you've been talking about all these years. This regime is not serious. We think that you've got every right to defend yourself. We need to think. The problem with our people is the tendency to say, if you are doing something, if it's not being led by me, I must do everything in my power to sabotage it. That's what we are doing. That's what I've heard anyway, because I haven't had the time to sit and follow a lot of these conversations. But it's sad. It's sad what our people are doing to opportunities that are presenting themselves to us. Now, this is where we come in, and this is what Scope is doing. You would have noticed that Scope has not been following these discussions like a blind person just going wherever it goes. Scope has been asking questions. So what we are doing is putting everybody in difficulty. Say, yes, Switzerland or HD, humanitarian dialogue. You say you want to help us mediate, but where are the terms of reference? Right? We're asking those questions. On the one hand, you're saying you're trying to find mediation. On the other, the Yaoundé regime is condemning our compatriots to life imprisonment. So what kind of influence what kind of sway do you hold over this Yaoundé regime? What are you doing? Can you for sure tell us that the Yaoundé regime has indeed committed to be part of the process? We've seen our brother, Abdul Karim, on leaving the talks in Switzerland, arrives in Cameroon, gets picked up and jailed. So now something is not right here. And so what we are doing as Scope is beginning to ask those questions. But remember that at this stage, and this is what a lot of people are not saying, no talks have started. What they are having so far, at least to the best of my understanding, are the talks prior to the talks. It's saying, what framework do we want to put in place? How do we want to put this framework? And that is why as Scope, we even had issues with the fact that out of nowhere, there was the formation of something called ACT or ACT. The question is, what is the framework? What are the terms of reference? How did you get to this point? And so we question things because we see, on the one hand, like I say, we've seen opportunities, but on the other, we are very worried of what is taking place there. And we want to ensure that we do not blindly follow this process and then find ourselves in a deep hole from which we cannot come. So it's a very fine line that we are treading, but that is what international relations is all about. Switzerland is treading a fine line. Everybody is looking after their interest. Our interest should be looking after the interest of our people and ask those key questions that would help us to play the international community in its own game. I think, once again, that's what I talked about, the act. The fact that we had, Scope went into these talks knowing that we are still talking about the talks before the talks. And then the next thing is we see that the delegates at the conference or at the meeting have been made to sign the formation of, what is it called? An Ambazonia coalition team. So the question is, what is the framework? What are the terms of reference? And all those questions that we asked in the letter that went out and the position that we took as Scope. And it's based on that that we decided, no, we are going to rescind our signature. It was ill-informed. The beauty about negotiation processes is that you go in, you send representatives, you have the right to withdraw if you feel like the process is not going the way you want. I have made it very clear that I put the blame squarely on the humanitarian dialogue in this case. And I try to distinguish between the Swiss government as a government and humanitarian dialogue as an organization that has been hired to facilitate the process. And I say the blame is that of humanitarian dialogue. Why? Prior to going to this meeting, at least delegates should have been informed that, listen, as you come to this meeting, prepare yourself. We're going to put in place a framework. We're going to put in place some kind of a platform that starts to consolidate. So when you come, these are the terms of reference of it. This is how it's going to be. This is the structure. Prior to the structure, this is the strategy. None of those things were put in place. To this day, we haven't seen what this is all about. So as Scope, we felt that they were putting the cart before the horse. And as a result, we rescinded our signature. Until these things are rectified, we will hold back our signature.